Chapter 4957. With more than 50 members of the three ranks Dian Immortal's might, the heaven and earth nets unleashed are unprecedentedly strong. At this moment, the heaven and land planes beneath him began to tremble unbearably, seeming to be broken at any time. Jian Wushuang was in this net of heaven and earth, and there was no possibility of escape at all. And he didn't have the idea of escaping. A bloodthirsty crimson was revealed in the deep pupils. But the nets of heaven and earth, thick as chains, entangled him in an instant, and the terrible general situation was spreading. The thunder snake, thick as an arm, surged, quickly consuming the strength of Jian Wushuang's fairy body. The head black robe envoy saw that he had been trapped and hurriedly shouted, "Take it away." In an instant, more than 50 black robes set off, each with a chain of Yanli in their hands, ready to rush forward. But an unexpected scene appeared. Collecting the power of 50 Dian Immortals, they failed to drag Jian Wushuang once. He stood in place, like a horrible mountain covering the sky, and even if dozens of Yanli chains left deep marks on his fairy body, he could not drag it. The black robes who saw this scene were shocked. "You must know that this is the power of more than 50 Dian Immortals. Can't even control a little Yangxian? Give me up." The black robe made an angry voice. The Yanli chain in his hand was almost tightened into a straight line. The other black robe envoys followed suit and tightened Yanli's chains. If this weird scene is seen by outsiders, it will definitely be horrified. The situation where there was no suspense at all has actually fallen into a struggle. Jian Wushuang couldn't move every inch, even if the Yanli chain on the fairy body had stretched to the extreme. Strands of scarlet light came out from his body, and the way of killing was already added. At this moment, Zhu Tianyi Xian also showed a azure glow, sheltering his fairy body from any damage. The true shadow of Wu Mei, the way of killing, was added. Jian Wushuang was completely furious at this moment. He suddenly raised his arms, facing the Yanli chain around him, and slammed it down. Boom! The extremely dull voice resounded, and nearly 20 Yanli chains shattered directly under this blow. On the spot, there were more than 20 black robes that quickly retreated 100 feet. Jian Wushuang's whole body lightened. He continued to stretch his arms like this, and once again smashed all the remaining Yanli chains around the fairy body. All the black robe envoys retreated 100 feet, and then met again. Jian Wushuang was soaked in blood with the double-eyed sword Wushuang, and directly confronted him. While taking into account his strength, his figure was like a ghost, so that all black robe envoys could not figure it out. The digital black robe envoy who rushed forward only felt that a blood shadow flashed in front of them, and then all spit out a thick sacred blood without warning. Their chests all collapsed at this moment, almost broken. Jian Wushuang blasted dozens of punches at an unimaginable speed. The black robe envoys who rushed forward received at least 2 punches each, and the immortal body was almost shattered. Repelling the digital black robe envoys in an instant, Jian Wushuang suddenly condensed the invisible sword, and then slashed down heavily. Wushuang Kendo, Xingyihu Haijianyi, the first style. Star. Zheng. The incomparable crisp sound of the sword burst out at this moment. The entire sky of 100,000 li was trembling under this sword. A sword slashed straight out, dimming the general momentum that Dian Immortal exudes. Boom! A million sword intent completely exploded, tearing a large area of the sky directly along the way, and then exploding in the middle of the black robe by thousands of awning pillars. The reason that Jian Wushuang, who has the true shadow of selflessness, the way of killing and the body, rarely uses kendo, is that the uncontrollable factors are too heavy. The appearance of this galaxy, lake and sea sword intent almost instantly consumed more than half of the power to support the fairy body. At the same time, the immortal body is better than immortality. Cracks appeared at this moment. The right arm of Jian Wushuang holding the sword had already begun to crack, and his blood was dripping with blood. The true shadow of selflessness and the way of killing are so exhausting that after Jian Wushuang released his first sword intent, he had to use the power of Emperor Pin Pill. He quickly stuffed several pills into his mouth and quickly recovered. Under this sword, the encircling circle was slashed abruptly to make a gap, and several black robes made it impossible to dodge, was destroyed Xianyuan, and died tragically. The power of a sword, so terrible. But this sword did not destroy the beliefs of these black robe envoys. They just rushed over again after a while. All kinds of magnificent and resplendent fairy styles, as well as the most treasures, slammed Jian Wushuang's head into his pocket at this moment. For a time, the world is prosperous. Even if Jian Wushuang could be 10, he could only choose to fight hard when facing these various immortal styles and treasures. The martyrdom of different sizes exploded completely at this moment. The full blow of more than 40 Dian immortals was so terrible that at the same time that Jian Wushuang's figure dissipated, even the Tianlu plate was crushed for 1,000,000 miles. What is certain is that if they let go of their hands and feet, the heaven and land plane composed of Yangxian bones will all be overthrown. Seeing the center of the big explosion where 1,000,000 miles of the sky turned into dust and ashes, all the black robe envoys were unconsciously relieved. This guy is just Yangxian, the oppression brought to them is really terrible. With a wave of hands, he can severely injure or even kill a rank 3 great Yangxian. What kind of terrifying strength is this? Fortunately, he has fallen right now. All the black robe envoys are extremely convinced that no immortal can survive this blow. With the fall of the sky, the leading black robe envoy did not relax, his eyes still solemn. He has an unimaginable hunch that Jian Wushuang will not die. As if to confirm his thoughts, when the unparalleled blast dissipated and all the black robe envoys had recovered their treasures, a figure still standing in the void appeared. At this moment, all the black robe envoys took a step back unconsciously, horrified. Ahem! A large mouthful of divine blood spurted from his mouth and then spilled into the sky. At this moment, his aura was utterly weak, and there was no real shadow of self, and the way of killing was all broken. Even as Jian Wushuang's most powerful trump card, he couldn't support it in the end, and the bombardment was shattered by more than 40 black robes. If it weren't for the protection of Jushinianixuan, I'm afraid that even the immortal body would shatter and hate it on the spot. The 9 heavens Yishuan, which was as thin as a cicada's wings, still exuded azure blue radiance. Under the impact of this horror, he did not even suffer any trauma, and was still intact. Jian Wushuang's immortal body is already on the verge of destruction. If you forcefully use the force, I am afraid that the meridian will suffer unpredictable damage. Chapter 4958. Fortunately, there were still a few DI pin pills hidden in his mouth, and he directly chewed and swallowed. But in this stage of the immortal body being on the verge of destruction, Jian Wushuang no longer has the power to fight. The black robe envoys, who had been horrified at first, breathed a sigh of relief again after vaguely realizing that he was incapable of a fight. The head of the black robe made Tiking's face finally eased, but he still did not dare to relax, and directly released a chain of Yanli, which bound Jian Wushuang. The rest of the black robe envoys also released their own chain of strength, directly enveloping his entire body, before giving up. From this we can also see how far they are afraid of Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, whose whole body was with only one head exposed, panted slightly, letting himself be dragged forward. He closed his eyes tightly, obviously repairing the broken fairy body quickly. In this battle, more than 10 black robe envoys were lost before they were reluctantly taken down, and the black robe envoy who was walking in the forefront looked pale. If it wasn't for Jian Wushuang to return to the Emperor City Temple, he could not wait to crush Jian Wushuang into powder on the spot. At the same time, he was horrified in his heart. What is the origin of this little Xiaoyangshan? He was able to cross border to kill Dianxian. And not only that, he even walked out of the river of blood and blood. This is the point that made him feel deeply afraid. You know, under the river of blood, even if it is the flow of Dian immortal, you will be directly lost in your mind, and you will not be able to get out of it. As the protagonist of the Emperor's Son, no immortal Yang knew better than him what terrible existence was under that river of blood. Just the endless army of dead immortals is enough to swallow any Dian immortal, let alone those mysterious ancient powers that cannot be looked at directly. You must know that even the Emperor's heavenly official, Bian Ziyuan, dare not get involved easily. But Jian Wushuang came out alive, with all his tails coming out. Condensing the deepest meaning in the heart, more than 40 black robe envoys tied Jian Wushuang, and rushed to the center of the entire Tianlu, the palace of the Emperor City. When the imperial city covered by clouds appeared in front of him, all the black robes breathed a sigh of relief again. Their mission is completed. The Tianmen of the Emperor City slowly opened, and then they quickly entered, as if nothing had happened. In the distant land where no one noticed, an old man watched this scene in horror. He had an inexplicable intuition. It seems that the sky is about to change. Entering the imperial city, stepping on the road of white bones, a line of black robes galloped forward quickly. The giant gate of the Temple of Heaven had already opened, and Bianziyuan stood in front of the Temple of Heaven with his arms folded, as if he had been waiting for a long time. Da Tianguan, another 12 were lost. The leader of the black robe envoy stepped forward and whispered. Bianzi nodded far away. My way, you are doing very well, let's go on. The black robe messenger promised, and then directly left Jian Wushuang, which was tied into a zongzi, in front of him. Bianziyuan immediately showed a meaningful smile. You did a great job too. Congratulations, you survived. Jian Wushuang looked at him coldly and said nothing. Don't try to resist, you are just the end of the crossbow, this seat can easily kill you. After speaking these last words, Bianziyuan stretched out his hand and carried him into the Temple of Heaven. The cold, withered hall was still the same as the first time we met, except that the damaged mountain and sea pillar had been repaired. The young, gloomy young man walked out from the depths of the hall slowly, and came to Jian Wushuang with great interest. I'm very curious, how did you get out of there alive? Tell me what you saw under that river of blood, and what you got. Looking at the young man in front of him and the crowds of black robe envoys, Jian Wu was pale and weak, and said weakly, First, untie me, I'm out of strength. The young man heard the words, meditated for a moment, then looked at Bianziyuan and said, Untie. His Royal Highness. Bianziyuan was a little reluctant, but seeing his persistence, he had to reach out and untie it. The chains fell off layer by layer, and Jian Wushuang escaped. Can you tell me? The young man took a step forward, seemingly very eager. At this moment, the joints of the whole body made a slight noise, as if waking up from a deep sleep. Standing next to Bianziyuan, he was shocked when he saw this scene. He realized something and hurriedly released exquisite mist. But everything is too late. Jian Wushuang, who was out of trouble, swept away his previous weakness, and his whole body surged into an unimaginable general trend. His right hand directly condensed an invisible sword, piercing the young man in front of him at a speed so fast that all the black robe envoys could not react. Since this distance was too close, he could only watch a long sword with a million sword intent pierced into his body. Time seemed to stagnate, and a small, light sound resounded at this moment. Then, 36,000 sword intent also poured into his body, directly causing unimaginable injuries. The sword intent shredded the fairy body and broke out completely. Then, the exquisite mist released by Bianziyuan hit Jian Wushuang. But it was too late. He had successfully escaped and retreated 100 feet in an instant. You wanna die. Bianziyuan was so angry that he couldn't add to it. He didn't expect Jian Wushuang to be so arrogant that he would kill the emperor in front of him. But Jian Wushuang, who stood holding the sword, smiled wantonly, and didn't even look at all the black robe envoys in this temple, even with Bianzi. After looking back at Bianziyuan for the last time, Jian Wushuang flew away directly. Kill me on the spot, whoever kills this son, set up a small official. Bianziyuan was already furious to the point that it could not be added. All the black robe envoys in the entire temple rushed out upon hearing this. Just the seat of Shaoshitianguan is enough to drive them crazy. The position of heaven official attached to the emperor's breath means that he can enjoy the moistness of the emperor's luck. This is unimaginable luck, enough to make them all crazy. At this time, the immortal body was completely broken, but the young man who did not know what kind of magical power condensed everything with a pale face and hoarsely said, Don't kill him, save him, whether we can leave here or not depends on here. Bianziyuan looked uncertain, and finally said cruelly, Even if he is let go, I will make him pay a little price. Boom. The giant gate of the heavenly hall was opened by Jian Wushuang with a single sword. He stepped on Yunyang and another sword cut the road of bones by 1,000 feet. Then he stood proudly above the void, like a real sword fairy, unrestrained to the extreme. He didn't seem to realize that he was running away, but he was traveling through the heavens and lands. Jian Wushuang wanted to fight, not escape. Chapter 4959. Hundreds of streamer-like figures flew out from the temple, and they continued to flow. Hundreds of figures are hundreds of Dayan immortals. They are Dayan immortals who are beyond the immortal. Their appearance filled the entire void with supreme aura, and Jian Wushuang is not unable to escape, but unable to escape. He knew that he couldn't escape from the hands of so many Dayan immortals, so he simply stood still and prepared for a desperate battle. Being in this boundless sea, Jian Wushuang was isolated and helpless, and could only rely on himself. Although there are 3 true souls of emperors in the Boyang bottle, this time, he does not intend to use them. If they know that their true souls are dissipated, it means that they will never be able to resurrect. So Jian Wushuang could only rely on himself. He even imagined where he would recover again after his fall. Looking at the black robe ambassadors who surrounded themselves in front of them, there were no fewer than 100. You must know that these are all Dayan immortals, and none of them are below the 3rd rank. Although they have been weakened to a certain extent in this borderless sea, Dayan immortal is still Dayan immortal, and their strength is still extremely terrifying. In the void, Jian Wushuang stood in the middle of the void, with broken bones under his feet. A steady stream of black robe ambassadors walked out of the temple and came to him. Slowly exhaling a murky breath, Jian Wushuang raised the real sword in his hand and pointed it straight ahead proudly. The black robe envoy pointed to by his swordsman stepped back subconsciously, as if no one wanted to do it first. Jian Wushuang smiled disdainfully. Facing so many Dayan immortals, he actually took the lead. The true shadow of selflessness, the way of killing, the way of guarding, the way of unparalleled swordsmanship, all 3 ways. This is the first time that Jian Wushuang has made all 3. The way of guarding was the first avenue on which he became an ancestor, and it was the most powerful avenue, the avenue that envelops the entire universe of divine power. His long hair broke open, dancing wildly in the void, and the true blue selflessness surged behind him. Thousands of scarlet red lights that represent the way of killing are flowing slowly. The invisible rules of heaven, representing the way of protection, protect his fairy body, and the dense lines slowly rotate. The Xuanhe red gold pattern representing Wushuang Kendo flows from the tips of his hair. 3 ways to add oneself. The reflection of him at this moment cannot be directly looked at. The black robe shattered, revealing the immortal body. The fire phoenix totem, which belongs to the ancestor of the Foam clan, uttered in his chest. At this moment, all the black robe envoys retreated, and their expressions were all shocked to the extreme. Is this the power that Yangxian can show? This turned out to be the power that Yangxian could show. This is actually the power that Yangxian can show. The repeated questions in my mind caused all the black robes to retreat without stopping, and even the breathing was a little short. The mighty power emanating from an immortal, they all couldn't raise their heads when they were oppressed, which was too terrifying. The 3 avenues were added, and unimaginable luck was flowing. At this moment, Jian Wushuang is the real existence that oppresses the heavens. He became completely devoid of emotion, just raised his hand at random, and suddenly a Tianhe roared and swallowed the void. A 7-star system is completely blooming between his eyebrows. All the divine thoughts are his domain, and in his domain, he is the real emperor. Use the fairy style against the fairy style. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's control of the immortal style had completely reached another unimaginable point. Just under this finger, more than a dozen black robes fell on the spot, forcibly tore a crack in the encircling circle. All the black robes were shocked, and they could feel the terrible flow of luck from this finger. For a moment, all the black robe envoys were extremely sure, Jian Wushuang, it was impossible for him to be an immortal. His existence seemed to have surpassed Dayan immortal and reached a certain unknown realm. There was no other reason, it was that Jian Wushuang's surging aura was so strong that it even affected their judgment. With 3 additions, Jian Wushuang now seems to be evasive, crushing against them with an unknown general trend. The invisible sword in his hand has been shining to the extreme. Behind him was a huge invisible sword in his hands, which was more than 1,000,000 feet tall. It's a big deal. At this moment, Wushuang Kendo opens. Wushuang Kendo, Xingyihu Haijianyi, the 2nd style. River. The towering Tianhe descended from the sky, and the void was shattered by the impact. The Tianhe composed of billions of sword intents flowed through Jian Wushuang's body, and then roared forward. This is Wushuang Kendo, the most peak release. Tianhe sword intent, far better than the previous 100 times damage. The true shadow of selflessness, which is more than 1 million feet tall, also released the sword intent of the galaxy and lake at this moment. The sky collapsed, and the road to the bones was directly shattered. At this moment, all the hard-headed black robe envoys dared not stay, all of them retreated quickly in horror. But this majestic and brilliant sword intent was so fast that it directly swallowed dozens of black robe envoys while smashing the road to the bones. At this moment, the third-rank Dian Immortal was beheaded without any resistance. Huang's swordsmanship Tianhe swallowed everything. Hundreds of millions of swordsmanship, extremely bright. It impacts everything that can be destroyed. The entire imperial city began to vibrate violently, and then ravines cracked from the wall. When the Kendo Tianhe dangled above the temple, all the black robe envoys who had escaped looked extremely miserable. They knew that the Temple of Heaven would never be able to withstand this blow. One thought is broken, only in the evening. When this unparalleled river of swordsmanship was about to overwhelm the temple, a figure quietly walked out of the temple, and then rushed up. Thousands of hazy water mists escaped from that figure at this moment, and enveloped the Kendo Tianhe. This is a strong blow, an unstoppable blow. But Bian Ziyuan has been unavoidable. His raised arms showed a weird bending posture that was oppressed at this moment. The robes around him were directly crushed to pieces, revealing the chest with flowing clouds and water patterns. Ah! Bian Ziyuan's forehead blew veins violently. He never thought that this sword would be so terrifying, even he could not stop it. Damn fellow, this seat will definitely crush your head with your own hand. The blood of the gods began to be squeezed out from every pore of him, and Bian Ziyuan felt that the fairy body was a little unsupported, and began to show signs of fragmentation. His eyes became extremely red, as if they might burst open in the next moment. Thousands of flowing clouds and water patterns began to flow slowly all over his body at this moment, exuding a unique and extremely aura. Chapter 4960. Bian Ziyuan didn't dare to be big anymore. Jian Wushuang in front of him was already different from when he first met. At this moment, the strong unknown luck on his body almost broke the heaven and the land plane, which was extremely terrifying. The speed of the flowing clouds and water patterns accelerated, and at the same time the endless exquisite water mist condensed from behind him, transformed into a huge treasure, shaking the sky and the earth. The huge treasure behind Bian Zi far behind at this moment also slammed into sword Tianhe. Fight between the two. He roared out, covered in a thin mist of blood. The originally unstoppable Kendo Tianhe was actually shaken at this moment, and it was difficult to advance even more. Bian Ziyuan laughed wildly. A pair of eyes looked at Jian Wushuang savagely, as if he was about to break his body into pieces in the next moment. And the long river of swordsmanship that tore through the sky and pointed at the Temple of Heaven, at this moment began to give birth to fine cracks. It seems that it may collapse at any time. Standing in the center of the void, Jian Wushuang, who circulated 3 great paths of luck on the fairy body, remained calm, as if he had no feelings. Seeing this scene, he just stretched out his finger and pointed at will. The true selfless shadow behind him immediately released an unparalleled force, covering the sky of Kendo. Sword Tianhe, which was likely to collapse at any time, was restored as before, and with an unimaginable general trend, he fell heavily. Bian Ziyuan's discoloration changed drastically, and before he could make any response, he was covered under the Tianhe River. The huge water mist treasure behind him finally couldn't hold on, and was completely broken. Facing the heavenly temple that stood in Tianlu for an unknown number of years, the unspeakable Kendo Tianhe fell down. Bian Ziyuan's figure dressed in a blood dance was finally annihilated in the sword Tianhe. Boom! The heaven and land formed by the accumulation of Yangxian bones were directly divided into 2 under this sword, and the heavenly hall was finally broken. With the shattered temple as the center, the shattered blocks quickly sank into the endless sea. Endless black water gushes out from every crack, swallowing every piece of land. Under this sword, even rank 6 Dian Immortal had no chance of surviving. He was so desperate that the black robe envoys who were watching from afar were more or less affected, and his expression was miserable. To the extreme. They never imagined that a little evangelist would reach such a shocking level. First, the emperor was cut off by his hand, almost dissipated from the fairy source, and his soul disappeared, and then the great Tianguan Bianzi was cut down by the Kendo Tianhe. At this moment, under the broken sky, only more than 200 of them were left in black robe. But facing a Jian Wushuang, even letting them dare to step forward, is already shocked. As the temple of heaven shattered, the plane of heaven and land was divided into two, and everything was on the verge of destruction. Jian Wushuang's true eyes swept across slowly, and all the black robe envoys he was looking at would retreat and retreat, seemingly likely to flee at any time. Although he was soaked with divine mind by the way of killing, he didn't lose control and knew that Tianlu could not stay for long. Once these 200 black robes were organized, it would be difficult for Jian Wushuang to deal with it. You know, Dian Immortal and Yangxian are quite different. Even if Jian Wushuang can kill Dian Immortal across the border, what about the 10 or the 100 that can be killed? How about 200? It is already an unimaginable thing. Even though he has 3 great roads on his back, he is still an immortal. This is an unchangeable fact. So Jian Wushuang immediately turned around and prepared to leave after slaying the Temple of Heaven. But in the next moment, a violent shot came from the extreme. He quickly turned around, and directly stretched out his hand to burst out a train. The two collided, shaking the void. Immediately afterwards, in the center of the sacrificial explosion, a figure rushed out, facing Jian Wushuang and gasping for breath. At this moment, the immortal body had been broken to the extreme, his chest was almost torn apart, and the blood was constantly gushing out. Jian Wushuang recognized that this figure was Bianzi Yuan, and he realized that he had a murderous heart in his heart. "All, what are you doing in a daze? Today is a life-threatening pile, and you will leave him here for me. Those who dare to disobey, die." Bianzi Yuan screamed frantically, frantic to the extreme. All the black robes looked at each other, they were all very nervous, and no one dared to rush forward first. Because they know very well that whoever goes up first will die. There is absolutely no chance of survival. Bianzi Yuan turned his head fiercely, a pair of eyes swept over the black robe envoys behind him, and then he dragged the broken fairy body to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's real eyes stunned, and the 7-star system between his brows began to circulate. Fairy style, a little mountain and river, accompanied by the true shadow of selflessness and the addition of 3 main roads, everything about him is unprecedentedly terrifying. Almost at the moment when Bianzi moved away, a huge sacred mountain rose from the void without warning, and slammed forward. Bianzi Yuan roared in a low voice, and directly smashed the sacred mountain with the immortal body, and rushed forward unabated. At this moment, only resentment was left in his eyes. Jian's eyes were as sinking as water. Facing the almost desperate Bianzi Yuan, he just stretched out his palm lightly. The next moment, 5 heavenly rivers rushed out from his palm, directly rolling forward. Bianzi Yuan was completely crazy. Facing the 5 Tianhe, he chose to fight. But soon he discovered that the immortal style he released had been swallowed directly, and he didn't even have the ability to resist. Facing the roaring Tianhe, he was left weak. 5 Tianhe directly trapped his limbs and shattered his fairy body in an instant. As long as Jian Wushuang was willing, he could be beheaded instantly. But he didn't do that, instead he retracted his palm and pulled Bianzi far in front of him. At this moment, Bianzi was far away, almost reaching the edge of dying, his blood eyes were completely dimmed, but he still stared at Jian Wushuang frantically, as if he wanted to peel him off. The reason Jian Wushuang didn't kill him was because he thought that Bianzi Yuan had saved his life when he was hunted down earlier. "Don't make trouble, I will let you go," Jian Wushuang said solemnly, his words full of supreme authority. Bianzi Yuan, who had reached the edge of dying, heard the words and grinned. "Do you dare to talk to this seat like this? You are just a little Yangxian. Who gave you the courage to make you talk to this seat like this? Don't you think you're going to kill me? This is the rank 6 Dian Immortal, and you are just an ant." Tianhe tightened and twisted his limbs directly into powder. A painful grunt sounded. Bianzi Yuan's eyes were dripping with blood, If you don't kill this seat today, you will definitely regret it. Chapter 4961. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. He felt the threat of hatred from Bian Ziyuan's words. As for threats, his approach is to completely kill them. But at this moment, Jian Wushuang had no intention of doing it. Seeing that the fairy body had been completely broken, and Bian Ziyuan, who was no longer able to fight, moved his compassionate heart. "I'll save your life, you can go," Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice, and then he was about to throw it away. Hearing this, Bian Ziyuan smiled weirdly. "Do you think that you really want to take this seat? I'm afraid you haven't understood the gap between Yangxian and Dianxian." Hearing these words, Jian Wushuang's heart suddenly felt a sense of crisis. It seemed that it was precisely to confirm what he was thinking that Bian Ziyuan, which had already reached the edge of death, suddenly surged with a terrible suction. The 5 heavenly rivers that had clamped him down at this moment actually languished, and they madly conveyed strength to Bian Ziyuan's body. Jian Wu has a huge change in double-sided color, and he feels the extreme strength in his body, which is madly passing. The source of the passage is actually on Bian Ziyuan. The immortal body was already on the verge of death, and the immortal body was far away. At this moment, the immortal body began to fill up quickly. The broken fairy body was refilled, and even the realm was restored incredible. However, within a short span of tens of breaths, Jian Wushuang's energy was swallowed by more than half, and he couldn't control it at all. He never expected that Bian Ziyuan could swallow it, without any conditions. The face of Bian Ziyuan, where his arms were reborn, was full of madness. His 2 newly born arms directly clamped Jian Wushuang and began to swallow even more crazily. "This seat has reminded you a long time ago. If you don't kill this seat, you will definitely regret it, and then you will completely integrate into this seat's body." Bian Ziyuan smiled gloomily, because the strength of Jian Wushuang's immortal body was so majestic and vast that cracks appeared in his new fairy body. "After this seat completely swallows you, you will have to see how you, a little fairy, can have the power to shake Dian." Jian Wu Duan was feeling cold. The next moment the Wu Wu Zhenying behind him suddenly opened his eyes. Facing the far side, he slammed his palm down. Boom! The sky was shattered, and Bian Ziyuan didn't notice the blow on the head due to the devouring too much. By the time he reacted, it was already too late, and his entire figure was blasted out of 100 feet, and the recoverable fairy body was almost shattered. Jian Wushuang stepped back a few steps, his face turned pale. If he didn't stop him in time, I'm afraid Bian Ziyuan would be able to swallow him completely. With the passage of a large amount of Yanli, the avenues that rely heavily on Yanli, such as the true shadow of the selfless and the way of killing, began to fall into a deep sleep. This made him fall into a great passivity. Bian Ziyuan, who had completely recovered now, waved his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth, and looked at Jian Wushuang with a grinning grin. "It really didn't happen to me that such a terrible energy would be contained in a small eternal fairy. I only absorbed dozens of breaths of time, and it was able to completely recover me. I have to say that you are a terrible existence. Now I can't wait to swallow you completely. Presumably you are the opportunity for me to break through rank 9. Listening to his voice, Jian Wushuang completely disgusted in his heart, and the last bit of pity before disappeared. He took a step forward and said coldly, "Want to swallow me? It depends on whether you can survive." "Oh, I want to see how you hold me to death." Bian Ziyuan laughed. The next moment, he suddenly raised his arms, with supreme terrifying power, directly grasped more than a dozen black robe envoys, and threw them at Jian Wushuang. These black robe envoys that had been grasped burst into blood mist in the air, and the cover pressed forward. The boundless blood mist swallowed, and the sword was cold with no double-sided color. In his palm, the invisible sword was recondensed, and the blood mist was cut away. Seeing the far side of this scene, he turned his head coldly and looked at more than 200 black robe envoys behind him. "If you don't leave again, I don't mind swallowing all of you, or turning into blood mist." Panic appeared in the eyes of all the black robe envoys, and they had already seen the far-reaching thunder cold-blooded methods. If they didn't do what he said, the end would definitely be miserable. "Anyway, it's death, it's better to fight." The black robe clerk gritted his teeth and rushed directly to Jian Wushuang. "There is the first, there is the second, and the third. After a while, all the black robe envoys rushed toward Jian Wushuang like locusts. Looking at the black robe envoy in the sky, Jian Wushuang quickly took out 2 emperor pinpills and stuffed them into the entrance, preparing to release his strong sword. However, when the 2 di pinpills completely turned into medicine and flowed into the limbs, he suddenly coughed out a large mouthful of divine blood, and then his breath was wilted. Originally, the true shadow of selflessness and the way of killing were asleep, but now the only way of guarding and the way of Wushuang's sword are completely withered. I thought it would be able to stabilize the situation with the Emperor Pinpill, but the immortal body could no longer sustain this consumption. At this moment, not to mention using a Xeon sword, even Wushuang Kendo can't be used. The black robe that rushed over made the sword retreat several tens of feet without double-clicking. Then, as if he had discovered something, he hurriedly shouted with excitement, "He is already at the end of the crossbow, and everyone is going to be able to kill him." All the black robe ambassadors suddenly went crazy after hearing this. You must know that whoever can kill Jian Wushuang will be able to take up the post of Xiaoshi Tianguan. As long as he can be in the position of Xiaoshi Tianguan, he can share a trace of the emperor's aura, which is enough to make every black robe envoy completely crazy. Jian Wushuang, who was already at the end of the crossbow, faced the full blow of more than 200 black robe envoys, and he was already unable to recover. All kinds of immortal styles the treasure cap pressed down, he couldn't bear it, and he vomited blood. Watching this scene far from afar, he showed a grinning grin. In his opinion, the complete destruction of Jian Wushuang was a matter of settled matter. Just ask, in this heaven, land, and even the entire borderless sea, who can block so many immortal styles of the 3-turn Dian Immortal? Just as Bian Ziyuan was about to step forward and devour Jian Wushuang, a great horror between life and death forced him to stop directly, and then looked up in horror. Next moment, I saw that in the originally shattered void, an inexplicable boundless general trend began to surge. Under this inexplicable general trend, it quietly reflected a unique and extremely diamond-shaped brilliance, like a light curtain. Good apprentice, immolate as a teacher, a sound of majestic anger, as if from above the 9 heavens, completely resounded through the wilds at this moment. Chapter 4962. Under the sound of such majestic anger, all the black robes stopped the movements in their hands for a moment. The passage of time seemed to slow down. Bian Ziyuan only felt that the speed of the blood flowing in the fairy body had frozen. The air dropped to freezing point, and everything was full of dead silence and cold. Then, the void quietly rippled at this moment. Immediately afterwards, thousands of white light soared intent, like a blooming lotus platform, fully stretched. And in the center of this soared intent, there are 2 figures standing. 1 man and 1 woman. The middle-aged man cleans his face without beard, is extraordinary heroic, and has long hair dancing in the wind. And the heroic aura exuded by that woman was enough to overwhelm her own beauty, and when her black gold dress perfectly set off her figure, it was extremely mysterious. They each carried 6 long swords on their waists, full of majesty that could not be seen directly. What flows around them is not the strength, but the pure sword intent. The whole shattered void seemed to be silent at this moment, and all the black robe envoys subconsciously looked at these 2 uninvited guests. A wisp of cold sweat flows from the far sideburns, and the horror of life and death that gushes out of his heart is caused by these 2. Besieged by the black robe at the very center, Jian Wushuang, who was already at the end of the crossbow, and could destroy the immortal body at any time, finally showed a wry smile after looking at the 2 figures. Yang Fan first raised his eyebrows and smiled, then was completely angry. "You guys, dare to hurt my disciple? Is your life too long?" Feeling that the coldness around him has completely disappeared, and the black robe made him speak wildly with dissatisfaction, and directly urged himself to suppress the pass. "Jumping beam clown." Yang Fan sneered, looking at the black robe envoy who was about to rush. He didn't even bother to pull out the sword. At the next moment, a subtle sword intent emerged from the lotus platform under Yang Hui's feet, directly slashing forward. A shocking scene appeared. The black robe emissary who was running at extreme speed, the fairy body was instantly fragmented, and miserably scattered in the void. Everything seemed like it had never happened before, extremely silent. Good apprentice, leave it to your teacher next. Step out in one step, thousands of sword intents spread across the wild. Yang Fan laughed loudly and flew directly towards Jian Wushuang with Jiang Li. Bian Ziyuan shouted in disbelief, hurry up and stop them, and kill them all at this time, not leaving one. With the issuance of this order, more than 200 black-robe droves all frantically surrounded Jiang Lian and returned. Facing the terrifying power that came over the sky, these two true sword immortals all smiled quietly, as if they were contempt. In the next moment, the void was completely replaced by a diamond-shaped light curtain. The boundless sword curtain fell down. This sword curtain is a sword that can easily kill 100,000 dead immortals under the sea of blood, and it is a sword that Jian Wushuang has to deal with all his strength. As for the fate of these black robe envoys, when the two sword immortals appeared on the stage, they had already been completely determined. The sword curtain fell silently, and everything was a foregone conclusion. All the black robe envoys who were preparing to fight with all their strength only felt that their eyes suddenly lit up, and then their heads turned around. They are without exception. More than 200 black robe envoys died directly. The death was only in an instant, and even the bones of the immortal body were turned into residues, scattered in the void, and turned into stars. Apprentice, it's not too late for the teachers. Yang Fan and Jiang Li descended directly in front of Jian Wushuang and said with a smile. Jian Wu was pale on both sides, and then he folded his hands and said, "Thank you two seniors for coming to help. The juniors are grateful." Yang Fan stretched out his hand and put down his palm, and said in a condensed voice, "You don't need to say thank you between you and me." Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly, "Actually, you don't have to come here to take risks." When Yang Fan heard it, he immediately slapped his chest and said, "If you are a master and can't even protect your disciple, it's better to die. What's more, the disciple is trapped by this group of salted fish. I am afraid that only these two sword immortals would dare to call hundreds of rank 3 Dian immortals salted fish offal." Jiang Li, who had rarely spoken for a long time, spoke at this moment, his domineering extreme, "Apprentice, who else wants to kill? Let us solve it together, so as not to leave troubles." Jian Wushuang did not speak, but subconsciously looked forward. There, far away from the edge of the sword curtain, when he saw Jian Wushuang, he cast his eyes, almost standing unstable, and fell into the void. Bian Ziyuan was still in the horrible scene just now and never recovered. More than 200 black robe envoys, that is, more than 200 third-ranked Dian immortals, all died strangely. I am afraid that the 9th rank Dian immortal came. This is impossible. But at this moment, it all happened. All of them died in an instant, and all the secrets of the temple completely disappeared. He who has no support, his face pale. "Hey, I even let go of a guy, so we'll solve it easily," Yang Fan said in a low voice, with his palm quietly placed on the hilt of his waist. Rank 6 Dian immortal didn't seem to be worth his sword, but in order to make a quick battle, Yang Fan still drew out a snowflake-long sword. The void suddenly dropped to the freezing point. Even after hundreds of feet away, Bian Ziyuan still felt the blood clotting. He was extremely convinced that he couldn't stop this sword at all, so he made a decisive decision. Almost at the same time that Yang Fan drew his sword, he directly used both palms and fingers to tear open bloodstains in front of his chest. Divine blood spurted directly from the blood marks on his chest, and then dripped into the void. The next moment, the originally dead and broken heaven and land plane suddenly surged, with all kinds of extremely powerful forces. Then, a body shape like a streamer rose from the plane of heaven and land, and came to Bian Ziyuan's side. In just a few dozen breaths of time, turned out to be a gathering of hundreds of Dian immortals, and a steady stream of Dian immortals flew up from the plane of heaven and land. They were all very thirsty and bloody, and their red eyes surrounded the far side. Bian Ziyuan stepped back and pointed in Jian Wushuang's direction, and said grimly, "As long as you take down the 3 of them, the blood in my body, including the blood of the Emperor, can be supplied to you. What are you waiting for? Let's go together." All the bloodthirsty Dian immortals were completely crazy and rushed towards Jian Wushuang without any hesitation at this moment. Yang Fan smiled compassionately, "All beings are equal under the sword in his hand." However, at this moment, Jian Wushuang, who was fully absorbed, only felt a fire in his chest. Then before he could react, a completely black bead, as if receiving some kind of induction, flew directly out of his arms and went straight to the void. That completely black bead, Jian Wushuang saw that it was exactly the black bead he found from the six-day realm, the first one of the next 3 days, under the Black Abyss prison. Chapter 4963. Since this black bead was found by him, it has been lying peacefully in his arms, without any vision. Except that the 3 emperors Jianying was very wary of him, this black bead no longer had a sense of existence. However, it was this black bead that had no sense of existence, but at this moment drilled out of Jian Wushuang's arms and flew into the void. Its speed is so fast that it even surpasses Yang Fan. What the is this? Yang Fan was puzzled, and the palm of the sword's hilt also relaxed. But under this chaotic and broken sky, above the broken plane of heaven and land, no one Dayan would care about such a small black bead. The Dayan immortals who were bewitched by the blood flowing out of Bian Ziyuan rushed towards Jian Wushuang from all directions. As the Tianlu plane fell into an irreversible split and fall, all the Dayan immortals trapped in the Tianlu regained their freedom at this moment. That kind of weird barrier that shrouded heaven and land disappeared, and nearly half of Dayan immortals, regardless of the horror of the borderless sea, flying or swimming, escaped from heaven and land. Nearly half of the Dayan immortal all rushed into the void at this moment, crazy. These Dayan immortals sinking into the endless sea were once the strongest in control of the battlefield, but after countless years, they have fallen and become bloodthirsty monsters. And almost at the same time, when Tianlu was cut into 2 pieces by Jian Wushuang, a giant beast suddenly emerged from the water in the not-so-distant borderless sea. He seemed to have just been awakened from a deep sleep, and 9 huge heads that looked like a big sun looked at the plane of heaven and land that was about to fall at the same time. Then the giant beast coveted, and after a brief thought, he plunged directly into the sea and headed towards the broken heaven and land. At this moment, hundreds of Dayan immortals rushed towards Jian Wushuang frantically. Jiang Liliu raised his eyebrows and directly stopped Jian Wushuang behind him, and then rushed to Yang back to say loudly, "What are you still doing in a daze? A quick decision." Yang Fan nodded, facing the overwhelming Dayan immortals, ready to cut a sword. Only Jian Wushuang stared at the black bead rotating in the void, and he felt that something terrible would happen next. As if to confirm his thoughts, the black beads that kept spinning in the void scattered hundreds of millions of gleams in the next moment. This kind of faint light showed a weird black and purple, like a wave, instantly spreading across the entire void. Almost at the moment when the black and purple light fell, Jian Wushuang felt a kind of tremor. Uncontrollable trembling. This tremor is like a real feeling of powerlessness, even beyond the powerless feeling of facing the emperor. Jian Wushuang felt that the strength in his body was trembling, and he was slightly dizzy in his mind. Jiang Lian returned to the 2 sword immortals with the same symptoms. Their expressions changed drastically and they looked directly at the spinning black bead. At this moment, all the crazy Dayan immortals began to release all kinds of terrifying immortal styles, and the violent force spread. But the horrible scene appeared, almost the instant when the power spread out, it was disintegrated and swallowed by the hundreds of millions of ghost lights cast by the black bead. Hundreds of immortal styles enough to destroy any heaven, and Yang Li were all disintegrated and shattered. Then the whole body was covered with Yan Li's Dayan immortal. The immortal body gushed out the blood at a speed visible to the naked eye, and in a short moment, it became a corpse directly. Nearly more than 300 Dayan immortals. Only at this moment, the fairy source burst into pieces, and the immortal body turned into a corpse. The boundless black and purple light is still piercing through the earth, wherever it can be enveloped. Yang Li is disintegrated and swallowed. Dayan immortal is also drained from the source of the immortal and turned into a corpse. Jian Wushuang had turned pale, he seemed to have realized something, and turned back to Jiang Lian and said, "Don't release Yan Li, nothing at all." Jiang Li nodded heavily. She and Yang Fan were not directly beheaded under this faint light, most likely because they did not release any power. Yang Fan's face was also a little pale. Even though he had seen too many tragic battles, it was the first time he had seen such a strange scene. What exactly was that black bead, and the faint light that radiated from it? was able to swallow all the approaching Dian Immortal in an instant. At the same time, Yang Fan also had an inexplicable intuition. If he had just released Yanli instead of Jenny, he would probably end up not much better than those Dian Immortals. Under the sky covered by hundreds of millions of looming rays of light, all the Dian Immortals that released their power were directly sucked into corpses, without even a bit of fairy rhyme. Bian Ziyuan had already been shocked out of his body. Almost at the same time that all Dian Immortals had died, he turned around and fled. However, he was still a step late in the end, and he subconsciously released his strength. Those dark and purple light rays are like Tarsus maggots, directly enclosing his entire fairy body. "Ooh!" He screamed in shock. The fairy body was wilting at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the fairy source was instantly shattered. Facing the shattered temple, Bian Ziyuan finally turned into a handful of flying ash and disappeared completely. This scene was completely captured by Zhen Wushuang. He did not expect Bian Ziyuan to die in such a rush. It was an unexpected battle, but it ended directly after the appearance of this black bead. Zhen Wushuang and Jiang Lian returned to the three, standing quietly in place under the shroud of this light. No one dared to do anything. That unknown Yugong possesses the power to harvest any Dian Immortal. With the complete death of Dian Immortal, hundreds of millions of Huamang came and went quickly, and immediately returned to the black beads. Then the black bead turned into a dark meteor, and got into Zhen Wushuang's arms at an unimaginable speed. Zhen Wu had cold hands and feet almost sat in the void. Since coming to Dianhuan, he has never had a moment of horror like this moment. The black bead with unknown power was really too terrifying. It would be easy to kill any Dian Immortal's ability easily, and it would be easy to kill Zhen Wushuang. And he finally knew why the true soul of the three emperors was so nervous at the beginning. Zhen Wushuang now regrets it very much. This black bead is simply an extremely unstable factor. If he releases a bit of power fluctuation, will he be directly killed? Something ran past. "Gang, where's the black bead just now?" Yang Fan looked up and looked around. Because the black bead disappeared so fast that neither of Jiang Lian returned to see where it had disappeared. But Zhen Wushuang, who was carrying the black bead, wanted to cry without tears at this moment, and didn't even dare to breathe. Chapter 4964. That kind of weird and inexplicable light disappeared, and Yang Fan dared to leave after another while. "Madam, you know who made the move just now. I think in this borderless sea, there will be no more than one hand that can arouse the terrible power just now." Jiang Li shook his head. "The two of us have been sleeping under the sea of blood for too long, and we don't know who else will enter here later. That's really weird. Fortunately, our husband and wife have always been cutting grass and roots, leaving no immortals under the sword, and there will not be any opponents who can't get through with us." Yang Fan scratched his head and said, and then heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Zhen Wushuang also safe and sound. "The apprentice is fine, otherwise he will die." Jiang Libai glanced at him. "Idiot, if you made a quick decision just now, why did you cause so much trouble? You will get rid of your verbose problems in the future. I'm not long-winded, it's a good way to attack the heart. The best way to kill the enemy is to attack the heart." Yang Fan talked freely. Seeing them bickering, Zhen Wushuang also slowly recovered from the shock, and then stretched his hand into his arms as if he was dead. When the finger touched the black bead, there was no horrible suction power as imagined, only a warm and cool meaning, as if it had never recovered. "It's really strange, how did this black bead get awakened?" Zhen Wushuang thought. But soon, Yang Fan interrupted his thoughts. "Apprentice, what are you going to do next? I want to hear your thoughts as a teacher." Withdrawing his thoughts, facing Yang Fan's verbal advantage, Zhen Wushuang just smiled bitterly in his heart, but did not stop it. "I came here to find a friend, and then I will continue to look for it." When Yang Fan heard this, he continued to smile. "Then we will protect you on the next journey." Jiang Li also nodded. "With us by your side, this endless sea will never threaten you anymore." "Ah, it's not so good." Zhen Wushuang scratched his head. Somehow he didn't know how to refuse. It's natural and righteous for the master to protect the apprentice. If it's good or not, you can come over. Yang Fan laughed, and took Zhen Wushuang directly and flew forward. Jiang Li also raised his eyebrows and smiled, seemingly satisfied with his husband's domineering, and then followed him. From this, we can see a magical scene. Two sword celestial beings crossed the borderless sea, with a shivering little Yangxian in between. Almost at the same time they left the heaven and land plane, they slowly walked out of the shattered temple. This figure is exactly the young man who was previously beheaded by Jian Wushuang with a single sword. He walked slowly in the heaven and land plane that had been in ruins. His face was without sadness or joy, as if everything here was not his. In the end, he walked in the center position after the war, and then his arms snapped. Suddenly, a unique energy fluctuation of several points began to gather in the void. As this energy fluctuation kept gathering, the originally broken void began to change. One after another, huamang, which looked like broken stars, began to appear, and then quickly intertwined and connected. With the intertwining of these stars and brilliance, a fairy source shattered, and the figure that could not die again appeared again, that is, far away. Thousands of flowing clouds and water patterns flowed slowly, covering the edges of his body, suddenly opened his eyes at this moment. The unspeakable general situation filled the void, and thunder snakes shuttled through the clouds. In the end, when his figure was completely condensed, the young man retracted his arms. His face was so pale that there was no blood. The boundless trend finally dissipated, and the distant figure fell heavily on the ground. Mist, I want your life. At the same time he landed, he punched the surrounding plains into deep pits. The young man walked slowly in front of him, then squatted down. He can't die now. Whether we can leave here or not depends on him. Jian Wushuang, who left the broken heaven and land plane and crossed the sea of no edge, felt that everything seemed to be a dream. The treacherous heaven and land plane and the terrifying river of blood have all become past tense. Today, he left unharmed, and there are two cheap masters. Jian Wushuang learned from the previous brief words that Jiang Lian's return to these two sword companions was likely to reach the terrifying height of the sword immortal before Zhen Wuyang had become emperor. Judging from their control of the sword intent and their inadvertent power, I am afraid that the realm is at least the 9-rank Dayan immortal. With these two terrifying evil spirits guarding him, Jian Wushuang would really be able to walk sideways in this sea of boundlessness if he hadn't met the real emperor. Moreover, he hasn't forgotten that in the ring in his hand, there is still an emperor with intact emperor body. In the fast crossing, Yang returned to the front. Disciple, where do you know the old friend you are looking for? Jian Wushuang shook his head. I don't know, I don't have any clues either. Behind him, Jiang Li frowned slightly, and then said, I'm afraid it will be a little troublesome. The reason why this sea without edges is called the sea without edges is because it has no boundaries. And once you have crossed the sea for too long, you will get lost in it. If your friend doesn't have the strength of rank 6 or higher, I'm afraid he will already be lost. Jian Wushuang was already a little worried when he heard this. Although Di Qing was the 9th rank Dayan immortal, he was actually at the end of the battle after that battle. Even if he was exiled, the immortal body was far from recovering. But Di Qing still has 7 true lives, Ukanshu. Even if Com falls in this borderless sea, it will not die directly. Immediately afterwards, Yang Fan said again, Disciple, I can ask, how long has your old friend been exiled so far? If it is less than a year, there may still be a possibility of finding it. Jian Wushuang said, in less than a year. What? Only 1 year? Yang Fan and Jiang Li were a little shocked at the same time. For Yangxian's long and endless life, 1 year is not even enough to breathe. Yes, it's not more than a year. He confirmed again. Yang Fan seemed to be thinking about something, and finally said, if it's less than a year, it's really possible to find it. You mean, go to that place? Jiang Li frowned slightly. He nodded, in this situation, I can only go there to try my luck. Chapter 4965. Jian Wushuang heard some clues and asked, that place is dangerous. Disciple, no matter how dangerous this endless sea is, as long as we are by your side, no one can help you. Yang Fan patted him on the shoulder. It's just that the place is not dangerous, but rather strange. Jiang Li smiled coldly at this time, and a pair of Ingmu almost killed Yang Hui to pieces. It's weird. I'm afraid it's an unforgettable old relationship. Yang Fan twitched at the corner of his mouth, and then said awe-inspiringly, Madam, what are you talking about? Don't mention the old things. I've already broken up with the past. Jiang Li snorted coldly, and the six-handed long sword slung around his waist screamed, It doesn't matter if you can't forget it, I will cut it off for you with one sword and one sword. Disciple, go quickly, it shouldn't be too late. Yang Fan left these words and flew out first. Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly. It seems that this cheap master still carries a lot of old love debts. In any case, his originally hanging heart also settled down a bit. Finding with a goal is far better than looking aimlessly. The sea of boundlessness is endless, boundless, and it is difficult for everything to float above it, only the bones of Yangxian can float on it. And the previous mighty heaven and land plane was completely composed of Yangxian bones. As he continued to move forward, various planes of different sizes appeared in Jian Wushuang's eyes. There is not much difference between a seating area and the universe of Wuyanji overseas. Here is simply a small universe. And as they move forward, there are various vicious and unopened Dayan immortals who want to kill them. Regrettably, if Jian Wushuang were alone, he would naturally retreat. After all, rank 6 Dayan immortal could already make him drink a pot. But now there are 2 sword immortals escorting them. Even if it is rank 6 Dayan immortal, Yang Fan, who is walking in the forefront, does not bother to draw a sword. He can even shred any rank 6 Dayan immortal with just one finger and his unmatched sword intent. Source. There are already dozens of tier 6 Dayan immortals who have traveled for hundreds of millions of miles, and the number of tier 6 Dayan immortals who have died under Yang's hands is nearly 100. On the one hand, Jian Wushuang had a bit of unfathomable strength in the frightened Yang's return. On the other hand, he was frightened by how many Dayan immortals had been banished by Zhen Wuyang Emperor. It's no wonder that there are so few Dayanxians in the Dasiu nowadays, and the co-authors have been banished into the sea of endless years ago. So far, the lowest level in this borderless sea is Dayan immortal. Jian Wushuang guessed that countless immortals were exiled here. But Yang Xian's fate may not be too good. As we continue to move forward, the plane of the endless sea gradually disappears, and is replaced by endless cold and dead silence. Jian Wushuang felt Daiking's breath as much as possible, hoping to find it as soon as possible. And a pair of old gods in Yangfan gradually became a little dignified as they continued to move forward. A pair of heroic eyes began to look around. A tree. How could a tree grow in this sea of no edge? Seeing the extremely weird scene in front of him, Jian Wushuang was a little surprised. Because in front of him, trees almost as high as the sky appeared on the originally endless Black Sea. The trees are tall, with only stretched branches and no leaves. They do not look like some kind of fairy tree. In Jian Wushuang's fascination, everything in his body changed, and Jiang Li and Yang Fan had quietly disappeared at this moment. Well, another illusion? Jian Wushuang frowned slightly, and he almost immediately realized that he was already in an illusion. Is it because I saw those trees? Being able to make him fall into the illusion in this short moment, the fairy cultivator who laid this illusion did have some skills. But it encountered Jian Wushuang who could see through it at a glance. Immediately afterwards, just as he was about to use the invisible sword to cut open the illusion in front of him, a snowflake-long sword took him one step ahead and directly opened a crack in the illusion. Then a big palm pulled Jian Wushuang out of the illusion. Good fellow, you dare to cast the illusion in front of this seat, I think you are impatient to live. Yang Fan was full of anger, and when he was about to do it, Jiang Li took a step ahead of him and directly stretched out his hand and shook it. In an instant, the entire illusion was shattered, and then a huge ball of hair was pinched by Jiang Li. That is a huge rabbit. Jiang Li's expression was fierce, and he was about to chop off the rabbit's head with his palm up. Madam, keep your hand. Yang Fan yelled, and rushed forward with a stride, snatching the rabbit from Jiang Li's men. What are you doing, want to die? Jiang Li was full of anger. Yang Fan's mouth twitched, and he held the big rabbit with a smile. Here, this rabbit can't be killed, it's a friend of the old man. At this time, the big rabbit suddenly broke free from his embrace, and turned into a very agile girl in the void. The smart girl gave a faint, then turned around and ran, and soon disappeared. This dead girl. Yang Fan muttered to himself, then smiled again. Can't kill, can't kill. Jiang Li put on an expression that the old lady was too lazy to care about you, and took Jian Wushuang to leave. However, at this moment, a vague and extremely agile voice, like falling from the 9 heavens, was indescribably beautiful. Since it's all here, why don't you come and sit with me? How about recounting your old feelings? Yang Fan's complexion changed in an instant, and her lips became a little pale. Madam, hurry up. After Jiang Li heard the mellow and charming voice, his eyes almost exploded with anger, and after glaring at Yang Fan with an expression that he couldn't wait to swallow it alive, he rushed directly into the clouds of 9 heavens. My old lady didn't bother you. You dare to find my old lady. Today I will break your Guiyu immortal palace. This is the first time Jian Wushuang has seen Jiang Li draw a sword, her whole figure with endless sword intent, breaking through the sky and going straight for 9 days. Yang Fan was pale and shouted, Madam, it's getting smaller, the structure is getting smaller. Boom. 100,000 sword intent fell from the sky, almost turning him into a piece of meat. Jian Wushuang's heart was frightened, and he never expected that the 2 swordsmen had a temper, and they were actually real swords and real swords. After avoiding the 100,000 sword intent, Yang Fan looked at Jian Wushuang nervously. Quickly, quickly, she is going crazy, the 2 of us quickly stop it, otherwise we will really be upset next. Jian Wushuang had no choice but to make Jiang Li so embarrassed. I'm afraid that the owner of the voice just now has an inexplicable relationship with Yang Fan. It's a love debt again. Chapter 4966. The illusion was directly torn to pieces by Jiang Li, who was so angry, and Jian Wushuang was able to see the true whole picture of the sea of boundlessness ahead. I saw a giant tree that could no longer be called a tree, rooted at the bottom of the sea and bordering the sky, with an indescribable canopy, almost vast and vast than a celestial plane. A strange fragrance also penetrated into the nasal cavity. This is a fairy laurel tree larger than a heavenly plane. In Jian Wushuang's memory, the world tree in Shaodijun's Degushan was not as grand as the fairy laurel tree right now. He saw it really. On the crown of the fairy laurel tree, there was an ancient fairy hall hidden in the clouds. Jiang Li, who was raging into the sky, directly hit the fairy palace in the broken illusion. Yang returned to the soul without possessing the body, but also hurriedly chased up. This ancient fairy hall lasted almost 9 days, lonely to the extreme. Jian Wushuang immediately stepped onto the fairy hall. On the vast fairy palace square, there are huge laurel trees growing. And on each fairy laurel tree, there is a quietly hanging round, emitting a hazy moon. Roughly counting, there will never be thousands of moons. The entire ancient fairy hall is shrouded in the brilliance of the moon, which is indescribable. At this moment, Jiang Li, who was raging into the sky, walked forward holding a true sword with a long and narrow blade. The square seemed to be rumbling as she stepped on it. The next moment, the originally closed palace door suddenly opened, and dozens of white clothes flew directly from the inside. Each of these white clothes is at the lowest level of rank 3, and they are listed in the front of the square one by one, and they look forward as if they are facing an enemy. Jiang Li didn't even look at them, and walked straight ahead. The one standing in the front with an old face and white clothes hurriedly shouted, "Stay aside, no one can go to the fairy palace without my fairy monarch's word. Get away if you don't want to die." Jiang Li whispered angrily. His violent sword intent was undoubtedly revealed at this moment. Lao Chengbai was taken aback when he heard the words. Obviously he did not expect the heroic woman in front of him to be so domineering. Seeing the terrifying aura on her body at another glance, Lao Chengbai gritted his teeth and stepped back and shouted in a low voice, forming. As his voice fell, dozens of white clothes all released their first blow at this moment. Their powers are connected to each other, forming an indescribable and magnificent ancient moon fairy formation. At this moment, the boundless strength of the power is fully displayed, and the vast ancient moon in the immortal array shoots out infinite strands of magnificence. The endless lunar blooming power surging out from every white-clothed body, purely and incomparably provide the fairy formation. This is an immortal formation that has assembled more than 10 rank 3 Dian immortals with all their strength. Even a rank 6 Dian immortal dare not look down upon it. But the most wrong thing is that they use the wrong object. An enemy of not only rank 9 Dian immortal, but also sword immortal, can easily let them know what a miserable end is. If the girl is going further, don't blame us for being impolite. The old-faced Dian immortal said in a deep voice. He seemed to be so confident in the power of the ancient moon fairy formation that he spoke to remind Qi Jiangli. However, Jiangli's expression was deep and cold, and he directly raised his sword and cut forward. A sword intent that is as prosperous as the sea slashed straight up. The sapphire square was ploughed by this sword intent to plough a trail that was as wide as 1,000 feet, and the floor tiles were broken into dust. Seeing this shocking scene, all the white clothes took a breath of air, and then desperately input power for the fairy formation. However, the next moment, the sword intent that shook the sky and the earth directly cut away the Gu Yuxian formation. It was too easy and freehand. It was as easy as tearing open a piece of white paper, combined with the full strength of the 15 three-turn Dian immortals, and even failed to save a breath of time. The sword intent smashed the dead, just broke the fairy formation, did not hurt a white robe, but shook them all out. The ultimate goal of this sword intent is that ancient fairy palace. At this moment, a black-haired white robe quietly walked out of the fairy hall, holding a real sword, his heroism and freedom to the extreme. Facing the real sword that came from the sky, the black cloth and white hair pulled out the real sword from its sheath, and brazenly confronted it. Countless sword intent swept from behind him, shocking the world. The two collided and the whole broken square shook. Jian Wushuang also opened his eyes at this moment. Another sword fairy? In the entire vast and infinite Da domain, even Dian Immortal is an index, and Sword Immortal is just a legend. But in this boundless sea, Jian Wushuang saw 3 Dian Immortals one after another, and he was already shocked to the point where he couldn't speak. The difficulty of becoming a Sword Immortal is even beyond the concept of cultivation. You know, if you want to become a sword fairy, there is no mature system. Every swordsman can only explore slowly, and then create his own sword. But nearly 9 out of 10 swordsmen died on the way to create their own swordsmanship. Only the remaining swordsmen who are far less than 10% are qualified to yearn for the path of the sword fairy. There is no concept of cultivation as a result of practicing the sword. Yang Fan is an example. In order to become a sword fairy, he once wielded his sword for a Chinese year. A long year is enough to allow a monk who is in the beginning to climb into the realm of eternal fairy. But in this Chinese New Year, Yang Fan was only used to wield the sword, and the difficulty of becoming a sword fairy is evident from this. Blocking the sword intent with the sword intent, when the two were completely offset, the black-haired and white-clothed stood on the broken square again, retreating half a step without a trace on his right foot. It was this subtle scene that was caught by Jian Wushuang, and then he directly determined that this black-haired white robe was definitely not a sword fairy. A half-step retreat means that in the previous confrontation, there is not enough power. And a true sword immortal would never retreat half a step under that sword intent. But even though he is not the sword immortal, he is definitely only 1 line away from the sword immortal, infinitely close to the sword immortal. The world is silent, there is no more fight www. MTL Novelle. The real sword is in its sheath, and the iceberg-like face of black hair and white clothes slowly bursts into a smile. However, Jiang Li, who was originally full of anger, changed his face slightly at this moment, and his eyes were a little dodging. Good fellow, why is this old thing here? Yang Fan, who had a lively look on his face, was shocked, and hurriedly walked to Jiang Li, blocking the sight of the two. Ahem, I said that, it is not suitable to stay here for a long time, we should go. Yang Fan said with a taboo face. Jiang Li glared at him. Going? Yes, I will level the fairy palace first. After she finished speaking, she slapped Yang Fan and flew out, and walked forward. Long time no see. At this moment, the black hair and white clothes spoke, and the joy of reunion after a long time, and a trace of vicissitudes were hidden in the words. Jiang Li's complexion was a little more unnatural, but he quickly returned to normal. Chapter 4967. Then she said, "Why are you in this place?" The black-haired and white-clothed said again, "It's been too long, I don't want to sleep any longer, so I got here as a company with my old friend." Jiang Li sneered, "It's really leisurely and elegant. How's your life?" The black-haired white robe asked immediately. "Not so good, get out of the way, my old lady is going to level this broken place," Jiang Li said in a deep voice, returning to his previous coldness. Yang Fan also hurried over at this time, first coughing deliberately, and then whispering, "Madam will not get angry, let's go." The black hair and white clothes laughed, looked at him and said, "Brother Yang, since we are all here, let's come in and sit down. We haven't talked together for many years." Yang Fan hurriedly rebuffed, "That's not necessary. Let's go back to sleep and we won't disturb your good things." After he finished speaking, he was about to take Jiang Li away. At this time, the fluttering and extremely charming voice came from the fairy palace, "Leaving in such a hurry, you haven't done anything wrong with your heart, so why don't you even dare to sit here?" Jiang Li instantly glanced at Yang Fan, who was about to flee. Yang Fan was shocked all over, then slowly turned around, righteously said, "I haven't done anything wrong, but today I happen to be tired, so I won't come to bother." Jiang Li didn't bother to listen to his nonsense anymore, and directly took him into the fairy palace with strides. Yang Hui's face was ashen ashes, and shouted at Jian Wushuang, "The disciples come and save me." Helpless, Jian Wushuang shook his head slightly, and walked into the fairy palace together. The fairy palace is vast, the clouds are vast, and a faint fragrance rushes out, giving people a sense of indescribable comfort. And under the scent of this delicate fragrance, the force in the meridians is recovering at an extremely slow speed. Walking in the back, Jian Wushuang roughly took everything in this fairy palace into his eyes. The fairy palace is simple and elegant, and everything built by Wen Yu has little decoration but does not appear empty. Small stars and round moons the size of a palm are dotted in every space, making the whole fairy palace look like a flowing galaxy, extremely magnificent. Under the black hair and white clothes, Jiang Li angrily walked forward. At this moment, a whisper came into Jian Wushuang's ear from behind. "It's really strange that there is actually a little Xiaoyangshan who is also here. Should we blast him out? Why don't you see them? Is the relationship with us Xianjun very unusual?" "Shut up to me, don't you think the things just now are not embarrassing enough? Don't blame me if anyone is talking." After being reprimanded by the old-fashioned white clothes, the grey-headed guys who were cut with a sword by Jiang Li stayed aside honestly, not daring to say anything. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, and didn't take their words to heart at all. In this sea of boundlessness, his own strength could prove something more than what he said. As they entered, in the depths of this fairy palace, clouds began to float. Accompanied by this ethereal cloud and mist, there was an extremely gorgeous woman. Different from Jiang Li's domineering and heroic spirit, this extremely gorgeous woman has gentle brows and indescribably gentle and charming. Even Jian Wushuang rarely sees such a gorgeous and gentle woman, just like a full moon, it means haziness. And holding a long-haired bunny in her arms adds a touch of softness and charm. Seeing this scene, Yang Fan's expression was extremely unnatural, but she still forced a smile. Then, all the white clothes in this fairy palace bowed their hands and said, "I have seen Guangyue Xianjun." The gorgeous woman known as Guangyue Xianjun smiled slightly, and she reached out her hand to phantom thousands of clouds to hold them all up. Then, her gaze slowly swept over, and finally her gaze fell on Jiang Li and Yang Fan. "Farewell last time, long time no see." Jiang Li didn't follow her practice. He stepped forward and said coldly, "Why are we blocking our way? If you don't explain it today, don't blame me for flattening your broken palace." Facing her threat, Xianjun Guangyue couldn't help but chuckle. "Sister Jiang Li, you are still as irritable as before." Crack! Jiang Li's hand holding the hilt of the sword at his waist suddenly squeezed, as if it was possible to hold the hilt out of water at any time. "Madam, calm down your anger," Yang Fan said in a low voice, trembling slightly. Guangyue Xianjun smiled again. "However, in my opinion, you are the only one who can hold Brother Yang's heart." Hearing this, Jiang Li's expression eased slightly, and his palm loosened the hilt. At this time, Yang Fan hurriedly said, Well, this is a misunderstanding. Now that the misunderstanding is solved, we won't stay here too much. What's the rush? Haven't seen you for so long. Don't you want to sit down and reminisce about the old? Jiang Li looked at him with a sneer. Sit down for me. Then, despite Yang Fan's whole body resisting, Jiang Li still sat down in front of the case. Jian Wushuang also took his seat, and was forcibly placed in the middle of the two by Jiang Li. The heroic middle-aged man with black hair and white clothes sat down next to Jiang Li. When they were all seated, Guangyue Xianjun also sat down, his eyes filled with joy that could not be concealed. The last time we left, we were still obscure monks, and now we are goodbye. After a few years, we have all become duplicity. Xianjun Guangyue was full of emotion. Although his face was extremely calm, his face was already quietly blushing. She let go of the little rabbit in her arms and patted her palms lightly, and then the next 2 columns of fairies, holding delicate silver pots, walked up on the clouds and mist, and then laid them down one by one. This is the lunar dew I survived after we separated. Now it's finally time for us to get together again. Jian Wushuang stared at it, and the silver jug poured out a cup of fermented rice, and suddenly a strong fragrance was released. Even if he was a bad drinker, he couldn't help swallowing his throat. There is no other reason, it is because this moon dew is too mellow. But after Yang Fan saw the moon dew in front of him, her saliva almost squirted out of control. Then he ignored Jiang Li's frustrated gaze and directly took a long drink from the glass. Let's drink together, you know the moon dew of Guangyue brewed. The black-haired white said with a smile, and poured a glass for Jiang Li. Jiang Li snorted coldly. Instead of touching the wine glass, he just picked up the wine jug with his mouth to the spout, and the cow drank boldly. The wine line was scented in the air. Looking at such a bold Jiang Li, Jian Wushuang and the black-haired white clothes were a little bit dumbfounded, and immediately picked up the wine glass and took a sip. Chapter 4968. The moon dew enters the throat and turns into the sweetest wine line, which penetrates the internal organs, making it indescribable and comfortable. But at the same time, this fine wine called Yuelu was extremely vigorous, and Jian Wushuang felt that the fairy body became hot after a cup. Putting down the wine glass, Jian Wushuang looked at the black-haired and white clothes, and found that he was already watching him. His eyes were facing each other, and the black-haired white robe smiled friendly at him. Jian Wushuang replied, and then continued to look straight. Good guy, it's really exciting. Yang Fan seemed unsatisfied, and simply put down the wine glass and learned how to drink like Jiang Li. Not to be outdone, the black hair and white clothes also picked up a hip flask and started drinking. Ling Jian Wushuang was a little surprised that the soft and charming Guangyue Xianjun also changed his previous weakness, lifted the hip flask, and started groaning. In this way, the original tense situation turned into fighting each other. Out of curiosity, Jian Wushuang tried the weight of the jug, and couldn't help but slap his tongue. There are thousands of hidden inside this jug. Looking at the exquisite wine stored in it, no less than 100,000 catties. If all these 100,000 catties are lost, I am afraid Dianxian will be completely drunk. As time passed by, Jiang Li threw down the jug first, but it was empty, without a drop of fermented rice. It's so happy. Jiang Li's expression was not drunk at all, and satisfactorily retracted his feet on the case, and then sat back where he was. After a while, Yang Fan, black hair and white clothes, and Guangyue Xianjun all finished drinking the wine in the pot in turn, and their faces were more or less a little drunk. How are you doing these years? The black-haired and white-clothed looked at Jiang Li, and finally made up his mind to ask. Being exiled here, who can be happy? Yang Fan and I have been in a deep sleep, and we rarely wake up until today. Jiang Li said slowly. The black hair and white clothes were silent, but soon he looked at Jian Wushuang again and asked, then this one? Without waiting for Jiang to leave the mouth, Yang Hui immediately said excitedly, this is the disciple of the sword immortal, and he is an inexhaustible stunner. As soon as these words came out, Guangyue Xianjun's beautiful eyes turned towards Jian Wushuang. She is very clear about Yang Fan's pride. As Wangu era, she used a sword to suppress the strong existence of Wanzhou Tianyu. Even the emperor wanted to draw him into his command. At that time, many Jinghong Tianjiao wanted to be his disciple, but he had never accepted one. Now that the years have passed, and when we meet again, there is an additional apprentice beside Yang Fan, how can she not be surprised? Hearing this, the black-haired and white-clothed could not help but smile. Oh, it seems that Brother Yang has a good vision. He is indeed a good seedling, but it is too much to say that it is Jinghong Tianjiao. How can Jinghong Tianjiao be a trivial one? The realm of eternal fairy? The fairy palace fell silent for a while. Jiang Li also looked upset at this moment. Tsangting, what do you mean? It's not interesting, I'm just correcting some problems. The black-haired white said with a faint smile. And Yang Fan, who was originally excited, also changed his expression, watching him say meaningfully, listening to what you said, it seems that you have received a disciple who is really shocking Hong Tianjiao. The black-haired and white-robed man named Kang Ting said quietly, almost, he has understood his own kendo, and he will come to the sword immortal in the future. Yang Fan couldn't help but chuckle. You guy, still like to joke like you did in the past, your apprentice goes to the sword fairy? Don't be kidding, only my apprentice can go to the sword fairy, okay. The fairy palace was silent. Tsangting looked at him and continued to whisper, competition? Come on. Whoever is afraid of who? Yang Fan said with disdain, hurry up and let your apprentice come out, we are in a hurry. As his voice fell, a black dress walked out from the depths of the fairy palace. In this fairy palace, all dressed in white, it seemed extremely out of place. The black-clothed youth's gaze and complexion were all extremely calm, like a real sword with a completely hidden edge, which made people absolutely unable to see through. And with his appearance, that calm gaze also locked Jian Wushuang for an instant. Turn 3 Dian immortal. When Jiang Lian returned to both, he also knew why Chang Ting was so confident. His apprentice had already reached the level of the third revolution. Rank 3 is already a qualitative change, not to mention that he has realized his own swordsmanship. Even facing rank 6 Dian immortal, he has enough power to fight. It's really tricky. Yang Fan murmured in a low voice, then quickly approached Jian Wushuang, and then lowered his voice, good apprentice, my face is all on you this time, it's all up to you. Up. I'm afraid this is not so good, I don't want to do it too much. Jian Wushuang said with a wry smile. Good apprentice, we must save me and hit this old man in the face fiercely. Yang Fan said in a low voice, almost kneeling before Jian Wushuang. Finally, Jian Wushuang nodded and said, then I will give it a try. Yang Fan immediately burst into flames, and almost jumped onto the table. My disciple has already agreed, so I'm ready to start. Kang Ting was startled when he heard the words. He did not think that Yang Fan did not flinch, but challenged. Are you crazy? See clearly that my disciple is the third rank Dian immortal. Just being oppressed by the force of growth is enough to make your disciple stand upright. Yang Fan snorted, stop talking nonsense. This sword immortal will let you take a look today. What is the real shocking talent? Jian Wushuang slowly got up. Jiang Li on the side grabbed him and said in a low voice, don't try hard, stop in time if you feel uncomfortable. Don't worry, it's okay. He smiled slightly, and stood in the center of the fairy palace. After seeing this scene, Xianjun Guangyue, who had originally planned to prevent it, had to give up, and at the same time she was sweating for Yang Fan. Yang Xian dealt with the first 3 rounds of Dianxian, which has been the result of no suspense since ancient times, and there has never been any act of Yang Xian to counterkill. Even the most shocking Tianjiao is impossible. Could it be that all the previously fixed thinking will be subverted today? Kang Ting gritted his teeth secretly. This extremely unequal battle, even if his apprentice won, it would never be too glorious. After all, the gap between Yangxian and Dianxian cannot be made up at all. With eyes facing each other, the black-clothed youth who looked like a hidden front was waiting to start, suddenly said, you are very powerful. You are different from all the swordsmen I have seen. Your sword intent is too pure, as if you have experienced the temper of blood and fire. Hearing these words, Jian Wushuang's original calm state of mind could not help but ripples. In this very short period of time, he could guess the characteristics that Jian Wushuang wanted to hide. He was definitely a terrifying existence. Chapter 4969. Wushuang Kendo, born out of the supernatural universe. It is the ultimate kendo inspired by the old man who guards the tomb of the gods in the depths of the universe. From now on, it was Jian Wushuang's strongest sword. When the whole kendo is fully integrated, he will instantly become a sword fairy, and all the sword intent of Jian Wushuang basically comes from Wushuang Kendo. Wushuang Kendo has indeed undergone the tempering of blood and fire before it can grow to this day. All of these were guessed by the black-clothed youth at this moment, and Jian Wushuang had to be shocked and wary. After speaking those words, the black-clothed youth directly squeezed the hilt of the sword at his waist. The aura of the whole figure was completely restrained. He said in a deep voice, "So, next, I will go all out. Don't think that I will lower my strength to fight you, including the Yanli realm, and I will not lower it a bit." Jian Wushuang nodded and said quietly, "Of course I can, and I won't hide my strength." The black-clothed youth said, "That's it." As the last word fell, thousands of sword intent suddenly emerged from his feet. The sword intent is like a changhong, running through the heavens and the earth, making the entire fairy palace in shock. Immediately afterwards, the Guangyuezyanjun sitting on the jade seat waved and lowered the endless moonflower, which directly turned into a barrier, enclosing the two. With this enchantment as the center, a martial arts field was formed, allowing them to let go of their hands and feet in this battle without destroying the fairy palace. Kang Ting, who was black and white, couldn't help expressing satisfaction when seeing this scene. The disciple under his seat was really amazing. Only the sword intent released from him formed a force of overwhelming pressure, almost immediately controlling the entire aura. In the competition between swordsmen, the first moment of the sword is extremely important. The so-called starting point, in a way, can already establish the battle. Kang Ting immediately looked at Yang Fan again, and saw that instead of worrying about him, he looked at this scene with a smile, and couldn't help feeling angry. This battle, even if it was won, was extremely disgraceful. Thinking of this, Kang Ting couldn't help but sneered, "Knowing that you are defeated, you want to fight. Your master really does not care about the life and death of your apprentice. If my apprentice starts harder, I'm afraid I won't have to tell the winner." Yang Fan's face instantly became cold when he heard the words, but then returned to normal. "It's a wishful thinking to use your disciple, your inexperienced kendo, to hit my disciple hard." "Oh, are you so confident?" Kang Ting said playfully. "When did this sword immortal not be confident?" Yang Fan said, stepping directly on the case, proudly speaking out a shocking word. "If my apprentice doesn't beat your apprentices today, then your apprentice will be considered clean today." Crudeness means being too crude. The fairy palace was dead, and all the white clothes were twitching at the corners of their mouths, including the Guangyuezyanjun sitting on the jade seat. "Yang Fan, you are presumptuous." Kang Ting smashed the case made by Xian Guishu with a hard shot, and straightened up, his face sinking like water. "This is a naked humiliation. If it were not in the fairy palace, he would have already taken the sword." Yang Fan said with her lips, "I'm not presumptuous. Why, can't you tell the truth now? You are so confident that your apprentice will win. Why, I don't believe that my disciple wins. Do you believe that your disciple wins? Then how about some more conditions?" Kang Ting tried his best to suppress his anger. "What conditions?" Yang Fan said, raising his eyebrows. Kang Ting said coldly, "If my disciple wins, your kendo belongs to me. If your disciple wins, my kendo belongs to you. How about?" Without waiting for Yang Hui to speak, Guangyuezyanjun, who was sitting on the top of the jade seat, had a solemn expression and repeatedly stopped him. "No, this condition is absolutely not allowed. I think this condition is not bad, but I have to add something to this condition." Yang Fan smiled quietly. "If my disciple wins, then tell your disciple the secret of how to reach Dian Fairyland." Kang Ting was startled, his expression slightly unnatural, but in the end he agreed. Once this condition is settled, it can't be changed. It is no use for Guangyuezyanjun to be worried and angry. And the reason why she was worried and angry was completely because these two rivals actually gambled out their own swords for this competition between apprentices. This is really fatal. You know, after reaching the point of sword immortal or even quasi-sword immortal, the competition between them is a matter of life and death. Often just one start is enough to determine life and death. As the original swordsmanship of the sword immortal, once it is fully known by evenly matched opponents, there is only one dead end. These two seemingly unremarkable conditions are the fate of a sword fairy and a quasi-sword fairy. This is what makes Guangyue Xianjun nervous and dignified. And she has also made a decision in her heart: no matter what the final result, she will not let the two show the sword. Jian Wushuang and the young man in black, who were completely enveloped by Yuhua, did not hear any conversation from outside. In their eyes and ears, there is only each other. At this moment, the breath revealed by the black-clothed youth was completely different from the one previously released, vigorous and vigorous. This made Jian Wushuang as if he was not facing a swordsman, but a sword, an épée without a blade and a sheath. Next, let him be more certain of his thoughts. The young man in black drew a sword from behind, a dark épée. It can't be described with a sword anymore, it can be described with a heavy ruler or even an iron plate. Without a sword edge, it was like a heavy ruler. Jian Wushuang had solemn eyes, and everyone who could use this épée sword was a swordsman who had tempered his sword to the pinnacle. The épée has no edge, and the skill is not working. Without the sword's edge, it has more lethality. Jian Wushuang can even be sure that Chong Yangxian can't even take this sword. At this moment, the young man in black seemed to be completely integrated with the épée in his hand, and his eyes became completely black. The greatest respect for you is to let you kneel under my sword. Jian Wushuang shrugged, and an invisible sword condensed in his right hand at this moment. This is the visualization of Wushuang Kendo, with sword patterns slowly circulating. Kang Ting, who had been watching this scene from afar, looked a little dignified. No sword is invisible, this kid is not easy. But Yang Fan was so proud, his chin was almost up to the sky. He once had a brief discussion of swords with Jian Wushuang. Although there were only two swords, he truly felt the aura of real swordsmanship. I may be able to beat you, an old thing, my disciple, let alone your disciple who is not as good as you. Chapter 4970. Yang Fan secretly proudly said in his heart that in his current cognitive considerations, Jian Wushuang and Tsungting were already side by side. Under Zhenxian, he has no rivals. In the Yuhua barrier, the black-clothed youth was the first to leave at this moment. He held the heavy sword high in both hands, and his whole figure was like a gloomy light, crushing towards Jian Wushuang. Zheng. Struggle. Jian Wushuang confronted him brazenly, and the invisible sword in his hand directly blocked his heavy sword. As soon as the sword came out, the black-clothed youth fully used every inch of the meridian in the fairy body, twisted the huge and incomparable heavy sword in his hand, and smashed it again. Sparks overflowing. Endless sword intent swept out, swallowing Jian Wushuang from all directions. At this moment, the black-clothed young man seemed to be tempering a sword embryo. A sword heavier than a sword hit Jian Wushuang's invisible sword. The entire Yuhua enchantment was covered by overflowing sparks. There was a satisfying smile at the corner of Kang Ting's mouth, and everything seemed to be a foregone conclusion. Yang Fan didn't feel nervous because of this, but was still smiling, as if not worried. On the contrary, Xianjun Guangyue was the most nervous, and seemed to be ready to stop the two fighting. But the originally silent fairy palace began to whisper. Who do you think can win these two? Is it necessary to say? It must be the disciple of the Tsungting immortal sovereign seat who won. You haven't seen his kendo. Good guy, even the same realm Dian immortals can't get close to him. Yes, that immortal is definitely not good. It is not easy to be able to survive until now. If you continue to fight, you will probably vomit blood. In the Yuhua barrier, under the rushing sword intent, the black-clothed youth has completely entered the state, but in just a few dozen breaths, he has drawn out 90,000 sword. However, what made him a little surprised was that Jian Wushuang actually resisted all of them under these 90,000 swords. How can that be? Have you squeezed enough? A voice sounded quietly. The black-clothed youth was startled. What? His response was a heavy kick. Boom. Under this foot, he flew upside down for 100 feet, and only after knocking out a crack in the Yuhua barrier, he was able to stop his body. Jian Wushuang retracted the kicked right foot, shook his wrist and said coldly, "If you are tickling like this, I think it can be over." "What?" The black-clothed youth's figure was shocked, and the 90,000 swords he squeezed out with all his strength were only tickling in his eyes. "You are looking for death." He burst into tears, and million sword intent burst out of the fairy body at this moment. Then, these million sword intents condensed into a huge treasure behind him, almost breaking the entire Yuhua barrier. Dangu sword Dao dash as the black-clothed youth screamed, the huge treasure behind him also moved, slashing down with a huge épée in both hands. Jian Wushuang, who was standing still on the spot, felt that the top of his head was covered. He couldn't avoid it, and could only face this ancient sword. At this moment, Wu Wu Zhenying directly blessed, Jian Wushuang did not release Wushuang's sword, but used the flowing cloud grass sword style. As another kendo, the whole spectrum of Luyun grass sword style represents vigor and exuberance, which can protect Jian Wushuang from any serious damage to the maximum. Luyun grass sword style, 7th style. The grass leaves turn green. The endless emerald green sword intent rises into the sky, turning into blades of grass, brazenly facing that ancient sword. At this moment, even the Yuhua barrier began to be filled with cracks. "Good boy, you have split this sword, instead of choosing to fight it hard, it's amazing." Yang Fan muttered in a low voice, his appreciation was beyond words. Kang Ting on the side was also shocked to the extreme. As a quasi-sword fairy, how could he not detect Jian Wushuang's intentions? This is completely breaking the thunder blow with the least cost. "Young man in black, this sword has been defeated." Thousands of grass and leaves brazenly confronted him, and then under the gaze of all Dayan immortals, they calmly split the black-clothed youth's ancient sword. This scene is too plain, but too shocking. The young man in black didn't even react, his kendo treasure was completely disintegrated, leaving no trace. The emerald sword intent also disappeared, replaced by another sword intent, a lonely sword intent. Jian Wushuang stood with his hand in his hand, his robe fluttered in the wind, and countless sword intent blossomed from his feet. At this moment, he took the lead in cutting out a sword. Wushuang Kendo, Xingyihu Haijianyi, the 2nd style. River. The lofty Tianhe swept across from the sky, and even directly tore open the Yuhua barrier under the Guangyue immortal monarch. Then countless sword intents rushed up, converging together into the broadest Kendo river. At this moment, the entire fairy palace was completely shaken, and all the white clothes were panicked to the extreme and began to subconsciously retreat. They all felt an extremely strong threat. Kang Ting and Guangyue Xianjun all stood up, their eyes completely solemn. This power has made them feel uneasy. Yang Fan laughed and said loudly, "Happy, happy. I saw this sword again." Jiang Li, who has rarely spoken all the time, has a reddish complexion, and he is obviously warlike. Jian Wushuang's sword. Jian Zhenxian Palace. At this moment, his figure completely disappeared, only the vast Kendo Tianhe rushed forward. There was only unbelievable in the eyes of the black-clothed youth. Faced with this mighty sword intent, he could not even rise to resist. However, as the Kendo Tianhe got closer and closer, he finally gritted his teeth abruptly and directly raised the heavy sword in his hand to greet him. The clothes on the upper body of the black-clothed youth instantly exploded, and the fairy body expanded several times. The heavy sword in his hand easily tore through the space and slashed towards the Kendo Tianhe. Boom! The unspeakable martyrdom exploded in the fairy palace, eclipsing all the stars and full moon. The épée 100,000 swords all slashed forward, but only smashed the Tianhe for several meters, and then all the swords with the people were swallowed into the Tianhe. Like mountains and seas will be poured, only Tianhe surging. The fairy palaces are like lone boats in the wild sea, crumbling. Xianjun Guangyue successively released his power to stabilize the palace, then looked at Yang Fan and said angrily, "Look at the good things your apprentice has done." Yang Fan shrugged, then looked at Kang Ting, whose face was as grey as death, and said proudly, "How about Kang Ting?" Kang Ting was still in shock, turning a deaf ear to Yang Fan's ridicule. Jian Wushuang's sword completely exceeded his imagination. How could this terrifying and unimaginable sword be released by a small swordsman? Even though he is a quasi-sword fairy, after seeing this sword, he has the idea of going all out. And this sword, naturally, can never be released by a swordsman, a small Xiaoyangshan. Chapter 4971. When the Kendo Tianhe was completely suspended above the entire fairy palace, it directly stopped flowing, as if it had solidified. In the next moment, the Kendo Tianhe burst into pieces, and the endless stream of light spilled over the entire fairy palace. All the white clothes looked at the dome of the fairy palace and were shocked again. I saw under the dome, as the sword Tianhe dissipated, two figures appeared. The sword has no double-faced color as usual, as indifferently as if nothing had happened, but at this moment, his right arm stretched out against the heart of the black-clothed youth. The exposed fairy body of the black-clothed youth was densely covered with scars, and drips of divine blood poured out from the wounds, which was difficult to stop. He looked at Zhen Wushuang in disbelief. His face looked like ashes. If the fingers that touched his heart were replaced by a real sword, he would have disappeared and the fairy body would be broken. Time seemed to stagnate. Zhen Wushuang retracted his palm, did not say a word, and then fell on the ground of the fairy palace. At this moment, all the white clothes, as well as Tsangting and Guangyue Xianjun, looked at Zhen Wushuang together, all in disbelief. With the power of cultivating immortals, it was beyond imagination to win an all-out three-tier Dian immortal so easily. Yang Fan grabbed Zhen Wushuang and laughed. Awesome. Tsangting sat back where he was, with a look of despair. Afterwards, the young man in black also fell from midair, looking at Zhen Wushuang with a complex expression. He seemed to be still immersed in that scene, and he hadn't recovered from his fears. He could never think that he would lose, and there was no room for defeat. How, Kang Ting, who wins and who loses? Yang Fan turned to look at the desperate Kang Ting and asked with a smile. Kang Ting slowly raised his head and stared at him, before saying for a while, I lost, and I will give you what you want now. After he finished speaking, he directly stretched out his hand and flipped it, and immediately a series of ancient incomprehensible sword patterns emerged from his palm. This is Kang Ting's kendo. But the kendo he released only appeared for a moment, even if Xian was directly dispelled by a force. Kang Ting raised his head and looked at Yang Fan with a smirk. Okay, let's say it's a decent old friend. I don't want to copy your old friend. Besides, do you think I am coveting your kendo? How do I say it is also a sword fairy? Okay. I just want to show off my apprentice to you today. Having said that, Yang Fan couldn't help laughing out loud anymore. But Kang Ting's complexion changed several times, and in the end only helplessness remained. Guangyue Xianjun, who rushed over, also shook his head helplessly. The free and easy middle-aged man in front of him seemed to be the same as before, without any change. It's all right, the wine is drunk, the words are spoken, and the fight is done, we should go. Yang Fan waved his hand and said, we still have things to do, so we won't chat with you. Up. Hold on, just leave like this. Kang Ting said coldly, making the atmosphere of the entire fairy palace fall into silence again. Then he cleared his throat and said again, Guangyue, don't keep it, move out all the remaining moon dew, there is not a drop left if you don't drink today, no one wants to leave. Okay, don't give it away, I may see you when it's okay. It's just like our relationship. Standing on the fairy palace square, Yang Fan waved his hand and said, in order to avoid Guangyue Xianjun's scorching hot gaze, his whole figure almost shrank behind Zhen Wushuang. Xianjun Guangyue narrowed his gaze to the bottom of his eyes, then came to Zhen Wufang, looking at him with elder eyes. Zhen Wushuang raised his mouth unnaturally. Then Guangyue Xianjun directly stretched out his hand and raised his right arm, placing an object in his palm. You are his apprentice. This is the meeting gift I give you. It is very useful to open it later on the occasion of life and death. In the palm of the palm, there is a full moon with hazy moonlight, which is extremely beautiful. Zhen Wushuang couldn't laugh or cry, but didn't refuse the kindness of Emperor Guangyue, so he solemnly put it in his arms after thanking him. And Kang Ting and Yang Fan went side by side, walking in the forefront. You have accepted a good apprentice whose future achievements are never below you, and it will only be a matter of time before you reach the Sword Fairy. Yang Fan smiled when he heard the words, my goal is not only to get him to the Sword Fairy, maybe to advance to a more difficult-to-guess realm. So confident. Kang Ting looked at him. Yang Fan sighed slightly, and then said, "It's not that I am confident, but that he convinced me that his future is more than just a sword fairy. Do you know why I was calm after he defeated your apprentice?" "Why?" "Because I know he can easily defeat your apprentice, and even beheaded instantly. It's also because I will target him, not your apprentice, but you." With the concentration of Tsangting, Rao was shocked after hearing such shocking words. "Do you know what you're talking about? I'm the ninth rank Dian Immortal, and I'm only one line short of climbing the Sword Immortal. Even if I'm not against you, I won't be far worse." Yang Fan sighed again. "I know, but I still don't change my opinion, because I've discussed kendo with him before this. He blocked one of my swords, and did it effortlessly." Kang Ting took a deep breath. "What you said is true. Although I don't have much truth, this sentence is absolutely true." Tsangting sighed faintly. "If this is the case, I can no longer guess where his future will be. We can't see so far, the only thing we can do is to act as a guide." Yang Fan looked into the distance, thinking, "By the way, you old boy haven't told me what's the realm of your apprentice. I saw at a glance that he was taking something and was promoted to Dian." Kang Ting smiled. "Sure enough, nothing can escape your eyes. Yes, I did give him a kind of fruit that contains great luck." Yang Fan was completely shocked. "I'm going, what Shigua would be so defying that it can help break through the realm?" He was full of pride. "I will call it Hunyuan without sea fruit for the time being." "Hunyuan no Haigua? What kind of name? Sounds so cheap." "Ahem, be careful when you speak, this is what I call it." "I knew it was you, old boy, who obviously didn't have a high style and had to pretend to be unpredictable. Having such a strange name has brought down the overall grade. Damn it, I won't say anything. Don't stop, you go on, let me see if I can try a few hundred for my apprentice." "Are you a mud pill? Do you want to try out hundreds of them? The ultimate fruit that contains supreme fortune, you can get another one if you can't help it." Chapter 4972. After learning that the so-called Hunyuan Wu Haiguo was born in a place called the Domain of No Seas, Yang returned with great interest. After directly setting out the real address of the domain without sea, he hurriedly took Jian Wushuang with him, preparing to go to the domain without sea. "Remember, that Sefri territory is a little weird. I was almost trapped when I brought my disciples into it, but with your two-sword celestial guards, there should be no major problem." Kang Ting's gaze was a little dignified. Yang Fan waved his hand. "I know, I will be careful." When he was about to leave this Guiyu Immortal Palace, suddenly a figure ran out of the Immortal Palace, his expression tense and firm. Looking at the figure about to go away, the young man in black said loudly, "Can I ask your name? I want to write it down and fight with you again in the future." Jian Wushuang stopped where he was, and the corner of his mouth pulled out a radian, Jian Wushuang. The three bodies were like stars and streamers, coming and going in a hurry, and disappeared into the boundless sea in a flash. "Jian Wushuang. I took it down." The black-clothed youth murmured, his eyes finally firm. Putting away his sullen expression, Kang Ting looked at his disciple, and his pride was revealed without any cover. "Lao Tzu's disciples are not bad either. I really want to see how they will grow by then." At this moment, Xianzhen Guangyue lacked the kind of hazy moonlight that couldn't be looked at directly, and was a bit more lonely. Her thoughts seemed to have returned to that too long time. Sometimes, endless longevity may not be a good thing for Yangxian. The countless ancient battles and nihilistic years have made them think about the ultimate meaning of existence. After leaving the Guiyu Immortal Palace, there has been no news about ditching. Although this is only a short period of time, Jian Wushuang is also more worried. You must know that the longer the timeline is, the possibility of finding a clear truth will expand indefinitely. Because the entire borderless sea has no boundaries, it is almost equivalent to a universe, and the difficulty of finding a Dian in such a universe full of fatal dangers can be imagined. Originally Jian Wushuang wanted to continue looking for ditching aimlessly, but was directly led by Yang Fan on his way to the realm of no sea. "Good disciple, you just follow us. I paid a lot of money to get this news from the old boy in Tsangting. You can be sure that you will become Dian immortal after eating that kind of Hunyuan without sea fruit. Seeing Yang Fan, who was very excited, Jian Wushuang felt a little helpless. Climbing into the realm of Dian immortal from Yangxian is a difficult and almost impossible thing. How could there be some kind of fruit that contains atmospheric luck, which can have such an unimaginable effect against the sky? You must know that even the former emperor of the 6 Crow Emperors did not have such a treasure of promotion. Therefore, Jian Wushuang did not hold much hope and confidence in this. A realm without seas, there are places in this sea without seas that are not seas. It's not that this old kid fooled me again. As he continued to move forward, Yang Fan began to doubt the real position that Songting gave him. Jiang Li said at this moment, "Of course there is. You have to know that in this borderless sea, there is something that will not sink in the sea and will not be swallowed by any force." "You mean the corpse of Yang Xian?" Yang Fan touched his chin. If that is the case, then Hunyuan Wuhaiguo might have been born in that place. Jiang Li curled his lips, showing no trace of disgust. What kind of ghost name, so weird? Yang Fan touched his nose. "I also think it's amazing, but as long as you can rise to the realm of Dian immortal, it will be a good fruit." Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly when he heard the words. He knew his own situation best. He had realized before that there was no source of immortality and he could hardly reach the realm of Dian immortal. This is why, even if he is extremely proficient in the use of the immortal style, and realizes the strong sword, he cannot be promoted to Dian immortal. Without the reason of Xianyuan, Jian Wushuang's promotion journey was completely blocked. But he still has the last ray of hope. If Hunyuan Wuhaiguo can really allow him to enter the realm of Dian immortal, then he will be able to easily crush rank 6 Dian immortal, so he also looks forward to it. With 2 true sword celestial beings following them, they moved forward at a speed of 10,000 li in a flash, almost able to traverse a celestial domain in a few breaths. This is the case, it took a long time to travel to the land without sea. When the endless black sea in front of him was replaced by the grey-white land plain, even with Jian Wushuang's concentration, he couldn't help but be surprised. Those that make up the grey-white land plain are not other things, but messy bones. The endless bones, shrouded in a unique barren, dead breath, make the viewer's heart palpitations involuntarily. This is simply a scene left only by a great battle between the ancients, and the land plain composed of endless fairy bones is even wider than the heaven and land plain where the frontier was located. After seeing this scene, even Yang Fan couldn't help but slap his tongue. "Good fellow, how many deaths did you form here? It's really magnificent." "Be careful, there may still be living things here." Jiang Li frowned slightly. "Are you sure that Hunyuan no Haiguo is here?" Yang Fan nodded affirmatively, and then pointed to the front. "Absolutely here. You see here, there is no order and heavenly restrictions. Yanli is in a state of chaos and unknown, which is quite in line with the meaning of Hunyuan, the old man of Tsongting." The kid sums it up well. Looking around, Jian Wushuang soon felt that what Yang Fan said was not unreasonable. You read www.thelandofukanshu.com, which is made up of endless bones of immortals, is already a land of no heaven and chaos. Let's go, find the fruit first, this little corpse field is nothing. Yang Fan said, and flew to the sealess area first. You are walking behind me, no matter what crisis you encounter, don't do it yet. Jiang Li also walked forward after an exhortation. Jian Wushuang nodded, and then stepped into this sealess realm after he was covering his entire body with his strength. Step into it with one step, and the unknown and chaotic power will come. The strength of a sword, like a sword, kept cutting the strength of the surface of the fairy body, causing Jian Wushuang to feel a slight discomfort. Seeing his discomfort, Jiang Li casually dispelled the chaos around Jian Wushuang, and formed a barrier around him with his sword intent, before he stopped. "Thank you." Jian Wushuang solemnly thanked him. Hearing this, Jiang Li raised his eyebrows slightly, and said with a faint smile, "Remember, I will call my wife in the future." You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.